Herzlich willkommen beim Taz Talk Nummer 85, hier im Format Taz Talk meets Queer Lectures. Insofern auch herzlich willkommen von der Initiative Queer Nations heute Abend. Zwei technische Sachen vorneweg. Mein Name ist Clemens Schneider, ich bin heute der Moderator. Und wenn ihr Fragen habt, dann bitte in die Kommentare schreiben, entweder bei YouTube oder bei Facebook oder via Mail an taztalk@taz.de. Und die zweite Bemerkung geht in Richtung der Taz selber. Wie die meisten wahrscheinlich wissen, ist die Taz kostenlos, aber nicht umsonst und finanziert sich durch ein genossenschaftliches Modell, finanziert sich durch die Zuwendungen, die freiwillig gemacht werden. Ich selber gehöre seit vielen Jahren zu den Leuten, die bei Taz zahle ich jeden Monat was bezahlen. Ich kann es jedem von Ihnen und euch nur ans Herz legen. Taz zahle ich ist das Programm, womit man den Journalismus der Taz unterstützen kann. Unter taz.de/zahle ich kann man sich dort eintragen und die Zeitschrift unterstützen. Einen besonderen Dank heute Abend an Luisa Faust und Peter Rohrmann. Die beiden sind die Leute im Maschinenraum des Diskurses, also diejenigen, die hier im Hintergrund alles machen und dafür sorgen, dass das reibungslos verläuft. Und ohne diese Leute im Maschinenraum des Diskurses wäre im pandemischen Zeitalter akademische Debatten und die intellektuelle Grundlage unserer offenen Gesellschaft massiv den Bach runtergegangen. Insofern vielen Dank an euch beide auch. Now I'm going to switch to English because our guest tonight is coming in from Indiana in the United States. And I am really, really pleased to welcome Deidre Mccloskey with us tonight. Deirdre is an economist by training, but much more by passion. By passion, she is a social philosopher, she is an historian of ideas, and as a friend of mine, and I think also of Deirdre's, once minted this expression, a student of civilization.
Yeah, I agree.
Deirdre was born in Michigan and studied economics at Harvard. Until 5 years ago, she was professor of economics, history, English, and communication at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Before that, she was a professor for economics and history at the University of Iowa. Deirdre has published, I think, 19 books by now and a vast...
Actually 25.
20, okay.
25,
okay. And a vast amount of papers, of which probably even she herself lost count. Among the books she has published are three really standard classical works of the history of ideas and the history of economics. Bourgeois Virtues, Bourgeois Dignity, and Bourgeois Equality, where she describes how the modern society evolved from the bourgeois spirit. I think we're going to hear a little bit about that afterwards too. Deirdre has received 11 honorary degrees. She was again neglected at the Nobel Prize this year, but I'm confident that eventually people will notice that this woman has deserved a Nobel Prize. And Deirdre, to get to a personal level, has fathered 2 children and is now grandmother to 3 grandchildren. In November 1995, Deirdre changed her gender, which was in parts a very painful, but I think in the result, a very liberating process. I am very glad to welcome you here with us, Deirdre, and I would like to give you the floor for some first remarks on the question of queer rights, queer freedom, queer liberty in the history of our world.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be in Germany. I'm only sorry that I can't eat Wurst with you and drink the excellent German beer. My theme is that queers, transgendered people, homosexuals, lesbians, whatever you call yourself, should be liberals in the German sense. They should be advocates for the free market and for a society in which the state, the government, is not zero, but small. Liberalism was invented as an ideology by advanced thinkers like Voltaire and Adam Smith. I always cross myself when I mention Adam Smith. In the 18th century, and came to slow fruition in the 19th. I mean, after all, the United States, a supposedly liberal society in this economic sense, had slaves until 1865. The core of liberalism, the idea of it, is that all people should not be slaves. To put it the other way, no one kind of slaves, no slaves. And the problem was that the traditional agricultural societies had slaves. Now, to turn to the present subject, it's a kind of slavery in Northern Europe that happened for the century between 1871, say, and 1971, a slavery of gays, especially men, to the laws, the famous paragraph 175 in the law code, the criminal code of the German Empire after 1871. They were slaves, they were victims, they were oppressed by the state. So my theme here is that if you're queer, you shouldn't be a statist, which would be the opposite of liberalism. You shouldn't expect the state to be your friend. On the whole, governments, kings, and so forth, and modern social democracies even, have not been friendly to you and me. There's supposed to be a religious aspect of this, because it's Protestants who are the problem here, not the Catholics. In the Mediterranean countries, homosexuality has never been a crime. It's been sin, even though the priests do it, but it's not a crime. You don't go to jail for it. It's only in Germany and England and Scandinavia and Holland and their offshoots, such as the United States or Australia, where you went to jail for it. In Germany, of course, on the order of 170,000 people were jailed for homosexuality, with a big peak among the Nazis. But it's not only authoritarian governments. In Britain, 49,000 gay men were jailed over the course of this 100-year period. Now, I'm not an anarchist. I believe we should have government. But I'm a liberal, so I believe it should be small and competent. There should be tanks in the Fulda Gap in northern Germany to prevent the Soviets from invading. There should be taxation to support elementary education, though not necessarily to provide it, the education through state schools, but the money to pay for it should be collected from you and me. And understand that taxation makes us partial slaves. Taxation is coercive and compulsory, and that you're only a slave on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays does not make you a non-slave. And if you look at government expenditure at all levels in Germany or the United States, France, it is about 3/7, 40%, say, of income. And as a liberal, I want that to be small. But of course, along with that, I want the government to stay out of the bedroom. My sort of motto for this, you could put it on as a bumper sticker, we call it, on the back of your auto. Say, liberty is liberty is liberty. Freedom of the press, freedom of affectional orientation, freedom from excessive taxation, freedom as a wife from being dominated by her husband. Those liberties, to use the Latin word, they're all the same. They're all connected with each other. If you have an oppressive state, it's very likely that queers are going to be badly treated by it. Under the first Soviet constitution back in the 1920s, homosexuality, no problem, feel free, oh, we're free, we're free, we're free. But believe me, under Stalinism, it was not a good idea to be gay. So a state that is powerful enough to govern the economy, this is a point I make as an economist, a state that is powerful enough to sort of run the economy, not that it does a very good job, but to try to run the economy, is a state powerful enough to stop you from having a boyfriend. Here's another way of looking at this. Liberalism can be viewed as adultism. Adultism. I'm making up a word. Adultism. Ismus, as you say, after. And it means simply that we should treat each other as adults, as grown-ups. All the other political philosophies, from fascism to communism and back, treat people as children. Treat them as people to be dominated and to be educated and forced to do things that they don't want to do. Now, of course, for children, it's very appropriate. If your 3-year-old boy proposes to run in front of the tram, you've got to exercise coercion, physical force. You can't just stop and argue with him. You have to grab him and pull him back from the tram. But that's not true of adults. Now, look, in the United States, especially, this view that I'm articulating, which is unfortunately called libertarianism here, and they don't use the other L word, is sometimes accused of being heartless. My social democratic friends, and I have lots of them, say, oh, you're so cruel. People don't believe in helping people. And that's simply not true. Adam Smith gave money to the poor with a liberal hand. Although, as Jesus advises, he didn't do it openly. He did it secretly, secret charity. I'm a Christian liberal. And I think most of my liberal friends have the same attitude, that you should help the poor, mainly by not preventing them from, I don't know, braiding hair for a living or entering this or that occupation. But also, if they're starving, you should help them. I myself have had trans people living in my house to help them. Not hundreds, but a few. And I think that's an attitude of so in other words, being a liberal doesn't mean you, as unfortunately Margaret Thatcher expressed it, there is no such thing as society. I think that's wrong. I think we owe it to each other to help each other. But the biggest way of helping each other is to give each other permission. Permission to have the love of their life. By the way, Buttigieg is the first openly gay cabinet member in the United States. He's going to be this very important Secretary of Transportation. So he's in charge of roads and airplanes and so forth. That's what we want. So it's adultism. It's treating people with respect. It's helping them. Let me see. Now look, I'm transgender. I don't much like the terminology, but there you are. And I understand it took a while. Here I'll end. It took a while in the gay rights movement to add the T, add the T. Because what I'll call straight gay men were embarrassed by these drag queens who came along to the gay liberation marches. And of course, the newspapers and the TV stations always focused on the drag queens. The guy in a business suit who just gay, they didn't want to hear that. They wanted to see it. And it took a while, but thank God, now we're unified. We have the same enemies. And it's worth pointing out that Stonewall in New York was not a state cafe. It was not run by the city of New York or the state of New York or the federal government. It was a private, profit-making cafe attacked by the New York police. And let me end on this. I want you to know, in case you don't, that at the Stonewall riot, it was the drag queens who fought against the police. Not the muscle men, not the leather boys, but the drag queens. Yeah, I have this image of, I've not seen any photographs of it, but of the drag queens hitting the police with their purses. So that's that. We would, of course, like the state to be nice and good. And certainly the German government is better than, I don't know, the Saudi Arabian or Iranian or
even the Hungarian or Polish, right?
That's right, much better than Polish, just across the way. The tragedy of Poland in the last few years just appalls me. And then if you go even further east, it's even worse in Russia. But okay, one can hope for a liberal government in this respect, but put not your faith in the state. The state, I repeat, is not your friend.
Well, thank you, Deirdre, for these first outlays of what is important for the development of queer rights and what the bases are, and that pointing out especially that this is not something which can be granted from above, but mostly what people impose from the state is quite opposed to the liberalization of rights and opportunities. I'd like to, since I have an historian of ideas at hand now, I'd like to first delve a little bit into this, a bit more into this question, how ideas and changed and evolved. So you've been writing a lot about the bourgeois spirit, and obviously the bourgeois ousted feudalism. So like tens of thousands of years of basically smaller and bigger feudalist government were replaced by the bourgeois society. The society which was set, which was sort of divided into very closed parts, was replaced with a society that is in the flow, that enabled people to actually break free. So how much is this being in the flow influencing the flow we can experience now about people understanding that they don't have to self-identify as this or that they don't have to comply with certain ideas that are given by society, by religion, by whatever ideology, but that they are actually in flow?
Well, it's the story of liberalism. The basic, what's happened, of course, is slowly over the last 2 centuries. First, bourgeois men were liberated, then poor men, then literal slaves, then to some degree women, then immigrants, then again women, then colonial people, then gays, then trans people. So there's this gradual expansion of the part of the society that we're going to agree to call adults. I mean, the most spectacular case of it is votes for women. That was a tremendous turning point. But my mother in the 1950s could not, and this is true, I think, in Germany too, could not open a bank account without her husband's permission.
Yeah.
So
or take a job.
Or take a job. It gets wider and wider and wider. And that's the basic story. Now, there are all kinds of dangers along the way. One of them is, just as you said, strict identity politics.
Yeah.
The trouble with identity politics is that it reactivates hierarchies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly, yes.
And that's exactly what we don't want to do. We had hierarchies in agricultural society, but as you say, we're very rigid. If you were born as a milkmaid in England, that was it. You were a milkmaid permanently. It might help you to avoid tuberculosis, but that was the only advantage. Now, look, modern societies are not perfectly mobile. And there are lots of restrictions on people that I want as a liberal to abolish. But sort of second wave feminism, for example, feminism has a branch called the TERFs, TERFs, T-E-R-F, TERF, trans-exclusionary radical feminists. They're particularly active in England for some reason. And they say of me, "You're not a woman, shut up, go away, I hate you." And that kind of identity politics is not what I recommend. We're all very complicated.
Yeah.
We're Germans, we're queer, we're professors, we're airline stewards, we're all kinds of things.
Yeah, and we have very multiple identities anyway, and
we should. I mean, that's the human way. We shouldn't be. That's the problem with hierarchy. Fixes.
Yeah, and maybe you could say that the horizontal division of society is turning into like a vertical division of society.
That's the danger. That's the danger, and among the verticalities, among the up and down, is the state telling you what to do, treating you like a child.
Just going to sum this up very briefly in German. Also es ging gerade die Frage, inwiefern die Verwandlung der feudalistischen Gesellschaft in eine offene Gesellschaft der heutigen Zeit auch einen Einfluss gehabt hat auf die Befreiung von LGBT-Leuten. Und da hat Deidre Mccloskey darauf hingewiesen, dass eben es eine graduelle Befreiung von verschiedenen Menschengruppen gab, immer mehr von Arbeitern über Frauen bis hin zu Transpersonen, und dass das eine Entwicklung ist, die damit zusammenhängt, dass eben diese alten Stratifizierungen einer Gesellschaft aufgebrochen sind, und warnte aber gleichzeitig davor, dass wir mit Identitätspolitik im Grunde genommen diese alte Vorstellung einer feudalen Gesellschaft auf andere Weise wiederbekommen könnten.
In German, I understand about every ninth word. Aber, I got that. Ein, I can recognize them.
Excellent. Well, then you basically get the main points. So you've also been writing a book about bourgeois dignity, and I like this word of the dignity, because it expresses that a person is getting its worth, its value from itself, and not from being part of a society, as it was in the feudal society, but as it also was in socialist societies, for example, like in the GDR or the Soviet Union. People got their worth from the work they performed, because they were an engineer or they were a coal miner or whatever. Now, since we are hosted by the Taz, which is basically a very left-wing newspaper, open, very open, and I love the Taz for that, but they are still left-wing. I would like to address one point that people from the left often criticize, that also the neoliberals or the capitalist system works in the way that you only get your worth by, so to speak, your net worth on the market. So like you used to get your worth from being the milk lady or the count or whatever, and now you get your worth assigned by your network worth on the market. What would you respond to those critics?
Well, I would say that that's a distortion, not necessarily by our friends on the left, but it's a distortion which you see in some people of the liberal idea. Extreme case is Donald Trump, by the way, is half German, to your shame. And he, the only way he values people is by their power and especially their incomes. And that's disgraceful. What changed in the 18th century in these advanced intellectuals like Adam Smith is that socially they were to treat everyone as equal. And that was sincere in the case of Smith and John Stuart Mill and Milton Friedman and me. I knew Milton Friedman. He was my colleague at the University of Chicago, and he was an egalitarian. He treated everyone the same way, and not in a nasty way. It wasn't just nasty to everyone. He was nice to everyone, and that is the core of the liberal idea. Now, the word neoliberalism is used as a kind of unthinking swear word on the left. It's like in the United States, we call people communists. And you stop thinking as soon as you call them a communist, there's no more discussion. Or indeed, it's coming to be called them a racist, although unfortunately most Americans are racist. But okay. So it's what happened in the 18th century is this idea of equality, which was the core of liberalism. And what basically happened is not so much that the bourgeoisie itself changed. It's not that business people got smart or nice or something. It's that the rest of the society stopped hating them. In medieval Europe, a merchant was assumed to be a cheat. Although especially in the free cities in Germany or in the city-states of Italy and a few other places, it was dignified to be bourgeois. But still you were hated by most of the society, and that started to change. So it's not so much that the business people changed, but that the rest of the society started treating business people as okay.
And the core of business people isn't that necessarily that they make money, but that they make a living by their own, which is part of the dignity, right? That they care for themselves and not by exploiting other people.
Well, in fact, it's stronger even. They care for themselves and their families by making things or giving services that other people like. So it's quite similar actually to the world of, say, painting or film, or you can't be a successful filmmaker if nobody wants to watch your films, and you can't be a successful maker of shoes unless people like to buy your shoes. So your customers give up some of their income, which they've earned elsewhere, so in a strong sense, the so-called capitalism, I really hate the word, but capitalism is extremely altruistic, because it's all about you as a business person trying to make me happy.
You once taught me this wonderful image, which I often use, of the double thank you.
Yeah, that's right. It is the double thank you. In Spanish, they say de nada. It's of nothing, but it's not. It's
not. Yes, exactly. It's because once you enter a shop and you buy something, you will say thank you when you receive the shoes, and
right.
The guy or the lady who made the shoes will say thank you when she receives the money. So it's actually it's very beneficial.
It's interesting that in the United States, if you come into a shop, the shopkeeper says, "How can I help you?"
Yeah,
it's about right.
And that, probably this also played a role in the emancipation of generally other people, which of course then also implies LGBT people, that once you're on this kind of interchange, it doesn't really matter that much which people you love, but it matters whether you like those shoes, and you're going to pay for those shoes, and you want to be happy if you have those shoes.
Absolutely. One of the most tolerant places in Europe was Venice. And then later, Amsterdam and Rotterdam and Antwerp. Why? Because they were doing deals. They dealt with Turks and Slavs, and they couldn't say, "Oh, we don't like Slavs. We won't do anything with them." They wouldn't have anything to eat.
Yeah.
So commerce. There's a famous phrase in France in the 18th century: "Du commerce," sweet commerce, and it's sweeter, at least, than a count, a graf, or a commissar ordering you.
Yeah.
Saying, if you don't do this, we're going to put you in jail or shoot you. It's sweeter to say, look, I have a cup. I'd like to sell you the cup. And the other person says, oh, what a lovely cup. Oh, beautiful. Yes, here's some money. Here's some of my labor for that. Oh, well. And they're both better off. In economics, at least in free market economics, we speak of mutually advantageous exchange. Because if you enter an exchange, this applies to labor too, in the labor market, if you offer yourself for employment, you must think that you're going to be better off than not offering yourself. And so this phrase that you hear on the left a lot, wage slavery, is a contradiction in terms.
You've already mentioned the Scottish Enlightenment, which for many liberals is one of the main sources of their ideological background. And there's some of those people who were thinking and working and writing in those days, like, for example, Francis Hutcheson, Adam Smith, Adam Ferguson, who have heavily stressed the role of cooperation for free societies. And there's one beautiful quote by the poet Alexander Pope, who is quoted by Adam Ferguson, whom I like very much. And in this, he quotes, it's from an essay on man from Alexander Pope.
Famous quote.
And he says, man as the generous vine supported lives. The strength he gains is from the embrace he gives. So it's like society comes together and gets strength by people actually embracing each other.
Now,
is this a basis, like this understanding of cooperation, is this a basis on which tolerance could evolve? And not only tolerance for convictions, for like religious convictions, for example, but also for lifestyles gradually and eventually?
Well, look, I think that the more we know each other, the more tolerant we become. It's thinking of others as the other that's the problem. If we don't know any queer people, then we're allowed to hate them. If we don't know any, Black people, we're allowed to hate them, or at least we're encouraged to. So, yes, the system we have, on the whole, in places like Germany or Sweden or the United States or Italy, I don't call it capitalism because I think that's a very misleading term. It's not capital accumulation that made us rich. It's innovation. It's new ideas. The famous one from Germany is the Autobahn, invented in the 1920s and then applied under Hitler. And it's just an idea. Nothing, no science involved. It's just, well, let's have limited access. So it's that, what I call it is innovism, because it's the system in the last 2 centuries of very, very rapid innovation.
And if I may add, not just for technological questions, but also for questions of society, right?
Sure. So, for example, the modern research university that you and I are involved in was invented in 1810 by von Humboldt at the University of Berlin. The University of Berlin was the first research university. Before that, the universities in Europe, which, by the way, came from the Arab world, were only about instruction, not about innovation. But then, especially in Germany, for example, in chemistry, there were chairs in chemistry, which the English found very objectionable. They hated this idea. Oh, we should have chairs in theology, and maybe mathematics, but not in chemistry. Yeah. And so this innovism is extremely cooperative. It's a very great error. I was once a socialist myself, so I kind of know how these people feel, and they're my friends still. I have lots of friends on the left. And they view, capitalism, which they call it, is this terrible system of dog eat dog, as we say in English. This competition is so evil. Well, no, wait a second. Competition is some other person offering you a better deal. That's what it is. That if I don't know, Facebook doesn't offer you a good deal, you can maybe go somewhere else. Certainly, if I owned a smart car,
and this also helps people who are different, right? Because you have a choice.
Again,
you can go to the other baker.
This goes back to the situation of Venice and Hamburg and Liverpool and places like that had to be tolerant if they were going to do business. And so I haven't seen any scholarly attempt to show this. It would be very interesting to look into it. But I think toleration of, say, homosexuality or of different color or of women or whatever is greater in commercial societies. And in fact, there have been recent experiments done on exactly this by Herbert Gintis and Sam Bowles, for example, that have shown us that the more commercial society is, the more open it is.
Okay, I'm just gonna switch to German for half a minute to summarize a little bit. Also, was wir jetzt gehört haben, es ging ein bisschen um die Frage, inwiefern bestimmte Gesellschaften es ermöglichen, dass mehr Toleranz entsteht. Und die These von McCloskey ist eben, dass die Kooperation, die es gibt, die im Markt stattfindet, dazu beiträgt, dass Menschen sozusagen farbenblinder werden, dass sie also eher die Gelegenheit haben und finden, aufeinander zuzugehen, wenn sie die Vielfalt und Auswahl eines Marktes haben, als wenn sie in Gesellschaften leben, wo eben diese freiwillige Austausch nicht möglich ist. Und insofern sieht sie auch Marktwirtschaft als einen wesentlichen Antreiber der Entwicklung von Toleranz. Switching back to English.
So I only have Frage, because it's the same as in Dutch.
Yes, I actually have a Frage already from one of our listeners, but I'm just gonna insert one last question of myself because I'm really interested in your answer. In your talk at the beginning, you said that the state is no friend of queers.
No,
now, queer people are liberated from an oppressive state by emancipation. They got rid of the laws. They are trying to prevent new laws from being implemented, like in Poland, for example. So obviously there is some way of emancipating from state oppression, but state is not the only oppressor, I would assume. There are also families who are harboring traditional values, who have strong religious persuasions, who are just, I don't know, intolerant because they're not nice people. Doesn't the state maybe have to play a role there to offer people, like especially young people who come from these families, a way out? Isn't there a positive role of the state too?
Well, there's an old conservative argument that you hear a lot, which says that the state is the educator of the people, that it instructs them, that it shows them how to be Catholic or how to be straight or how to be whatever. And count me suspicious of this argument. The state is a conservative force on the whole. Of course it is. And the rare cases, look, let's take my own country. The state like the word stammen in German, for instance, but also the federal government enforced segregation, passed the so-called Fugitive Slave Law in 1854. I mean, the state on the whole is a source of oppression. Now, I agree that we should work to not overthrow, that's not the word, vote out the Freedom and Justice Party in Poland. I agree. So there's a role for politics, namely in trying to influence the state on this matter. But it's true that some people, by the way, the religious argument, particularly the Christian religious argument against homosexuality, is, in my view, completely crazy. It says that the gospel of love of Jesus, which I believe in, I'm an Anglican, is about hating people. Well, this is obviously insane. And then the few passages, too, actually, in the Hebrew Bible that say, oh, a man shouldn't sleep with a man, that's bad. Well, for one thing, King David loved Jonathan with a love, it says in the Bible, a love surpassing that of women. Well, what have we here? But in any case, if you're going to use one or two passages in the Hebrew Bible to say, well, that's why I hate queers, then why aren't you an Orthodox Jew? Why do you mix wool and linen in your clothing? Why don't you take a sacrificial bath after your period if you're a woman? I mean, come on, this is, they've selected it. And by the way, very interestingly, this so-called religious hostility to homosexuality in the United States, at least, is new. It comes well after the Second World War. It's not true of conservative Christians in, say, 1900 in the United States. They were very relaxed about homosexuality.
Okay, but I mean, the problem still remains. What do you do with people who like don't have the opportunity to emancipate themselves because they're just not granted them by their families?
And you and I preach, you and I help them directly. You and I, of course, agitate against the government oppressing them. You and I, most particularly, the way to get a free society is through popular culture. The films in which gay people and trans people are treated as humans instead of as the other have had much more influence than anything you and I can say. So this has happened over and over again. Instead of, and look, interesting example is rock music. With the musicians with eye makeup and so on, that liberated drag queens. It said, oh, well, this rock musician I like runs around in eye makeup. What's the worry here?
Yeah, I completely agree. And especially, I mean, we talked about this before we even zoomed into this talk. Popular culture is spreading throughout the globe. And now, like, little kids in Brazil have the opportunity to watch a Netflix series where, I don't know, there's this Netflix series called Sexual Education, which is quite funny, actually. And it's about, like, young adults growing up and finding their sexual identity. And the kid in Brazil can now watch it on its smartphone.
I know, but the tyrants hate this. They hate the free internet as they hate the free press. Yeah. And an interesting example of this is jazz, American jazz in the Soviet Union. Like blue jeans, it was viewed as a liberation. And actually, when you think about jazz or rock music, they embody, so to speak, what's the word for sound? They embody liberty. So jazz and rock music are arguments against tyranny, just in their essence.
Very good. I'm just going to summarize this briefly. Also es ging die Frage, was denn also jenseits der Emanzipation von Homosexuellen und LGBT-Personen, die sozusagen vom Staat emanzipiert werden, also von Unterdrückung, von entsprechender Gesetzgebung und so weiter, was passieren kann für die Leute, die jetzt eben nicht erreicht werden durch die normale Emanzipationsbewegung, die in besonders stark religiösen Familien sozusagen feststecken. Und da hat Deidre Mccloskey vor allem hingewiesen auf die bedeutende Rolle von Kultur, insbesondere Popkultur, die eben jungen Menschen überall ermöglicht zu sehen, dass es andere Lebensformen gibt, die denen Rollenmodelle anbieten kann und eben nicht über eine staatliche Institution versucht, Toleranz zu verbreiten, sondern durch Kultur. Okay, so now finally, the poor Emil Wiedemann has been waiting in the queue for quite a while now with his question. I'm just going to read it to you. How do you explain why the emancipation of various groups, women, POC, queers, has most often been supported by political movements that can be described as socialist rather than liberal?
Well, that's a paradox, but bear in mind that the liberals, the real ones, not Margaret Thatcher necessarily, but the real ones, they're in the front line of these liberations. John Stuart Mill, for example, the great English philosopher in the middle of the 19th century, was an early feminist. And he was rather serious about it. He was a member of Parliament for a while and kept trying to get the English Parliament to pass laws to free married women from their virtual enslavement to their husbands.
Yeah.
And yes, they're the kind of common source of a kind of nice version of socialism and a nice version of liberalism in the early 19th century. It's true that on the whole, the left is, what can we say, friendly towards queers. Though, as I said, there are shocking counterexamples, such as these TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, especially in Britain, who are very non-free oriented. And indeed, the current cancel culture, so-called, that's nowadays coming from the left, but in the old days it came from the right, is against free speech. And as I said, liberty is liberty, is liberty. If you attack free speech, the next thing you're going to do, as in Turkey, you close all the newspapers, then you fire 20 or 30,000 teachers, and then you've got complete control of the society, and in that case can impose radical Islamic values on what was once a free country.
I'd like to maybe add something to the answer of this question.
Sure.
Like some thoughts of my own. I always have the impression that there is a very strong connection in the roots of liberalism and, let's say, the left.
Yeah.
Because 200 years ago, 250 years ago, we were basically absolutely in the same camp because it was all about emancipation. It was about freeing people and getting rid of hierarchy, getting rid of oppressive systems.
That's right.
Then the socialist understanding on the economic questions gradually grew more important in the left. And then there's sort of a split between left and liberals. And then, of course, this split intensified massively in the 20th century because at least after World War II, the world was divided into the communist and the free world.
Right.
And in the course of this split of the world, liberals were very, very closely intertwined with conservatives because they were the anti-communist bloc. And they sort of lost a little bit track of the emancipatory part of their heritage, whereas on the left, big parts of the left who were only on economic issues, focused on economic issues, lost the emancipatory thing too. And maybe nowadays, with things turning a lot and changing, and I don't know, Trump and Bolsonaro and Duterte and Erdogan and Orban and how they all these people are called, maybe it's even a time where this emancipatory heritage of the left and the liberals can become something which defines us a little bit more. And let's see what comes out of the new United States government and what develops in the whole world as response to this right-wing threat we are seeing at the moment.
Well, I hope it does. I'm very much against Donald Trump and Bolsonaro and so forth. And the Freedom and Justice Party in Poland. Freedom and justice. Come on. Talk about that contradiction in terms. Yeah, I think that's right. Some people on the left, on the extreme left, very much support Cuba, for example, or Venezuela. And they think, well, Cuba must have a really liberal policy about gay people. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. As I forget whether I said this before, but the Soviet Constitution was wonderful about gay people, but not in practice.
Che Guevara is notorious for being really, really a homophobic prick too.
I'm not surprised. Perhaps he had some anxieties on this account. That's often the case. Yes, if I could persuade my socialist friends to understand that freedom of enterprise, of where you go work or what shop you start, is freedom too, then we could join in this emancipation.
Well, that's a very nice final statement, I think. I'm just going to translate in German before I close the session. Am Ende ging es um die Frage, ob woher es kommt, dass linke Gruppen grundsätzlich sehr viel stärker in der Unterstützung von emanzipativen Bewegungen waren als die Liberalen. Und Deidre Mccloskey hat zusammen mit mir so ein bisschen entwickelt, inwiefern einfach da auch historische Gründe dahinter stehen, dass es grundsätzlich eine emanzipatorische Verbindung gab zwischen Linken und Liberalen, gerade im 17., 18. Jahrhundert, 19. Jahrhundert, in der Aufklärung mit John Stuart Mill und solchen Leuten, das aber mit dem Aufkommen der sozialdemokratisch-sozialistischen Ideen und deren Dominanz und der Dominanz der ökonomischen Fragen in der Linken auf der einen Seite und dann eben der die Allianz zwischen den bürgerlichen Lager sozusagen gegenüber dem Kommunismus, also Liberale und Konservative andererseits, eine Spaltung aufgetreten ist, wo dann auch dieses emanzipatorische Element auf beiden Seiten, bei den Liberalen und bei den Linken, manchmal etwas unter den Tisch gefallen ist. Und der Ausblick war, gerade von Deidre Mccloskey, dass sie hofft, viele ihrer von der Linken kommenden Freunde zu überzeugen, dass man gemeinsame Sache macht und dass man sehr viele Werte auch teilt. Und dass wir gemeinsame Anliegen haben, für die es sich lohnt, zu streiten. So, Deirdre, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I think you mentioned him before, and I was adamant to let drop his name, Pete Buttigieg. I just bought his most recent book. I love the title, Trust. I think it's wonderful that we can talk on this really historic day for the LGBT community. We had some queer politicians in Germany and in Europe, notably our foreign secretary, Westerwelle, for example, or the mayor of Berlin, Wowereit, and of course in Belgium, in Iceland, in Ireland, in many countries. And I'm really glad that in the United States by now we shall, if the Senate confirms this, see a queer person in the administration in the close circle. That is a historic day, and that's perfect to talk to you on this in this historic week. Thank you very, very much, Deirdre.
And yesterday was Beethoven's birthday.
That's right. Yes, that too. Alle Menschen werden Brüder, as it says in the Ninth Symphony. All peoples right. Are going to become brothers and sisters, of course.
I just heard it this morning. Maybe today is the birthday. I think it's today.
Yeah, so let's aim for a world where all people become sisters and brothers. I think that unites a lot of us, and I think that's a very nice perspective. Ganz am Ende darf ich Sie und euch noch darauf hinweisen, dass morgen um 19 Uhr der letzte Taz-Talk dieses Jahres stattfinden wird, Nummer 86. Es geht zum Thema die Irrtümer der Corona-SkeptikerInnen mit Gerion Asmuth, Ulrike Winkelmann, Chefredakteurin, Malte Kreuzfeld, Jan Feddersen, alle von der Taz. Und schaltet auch morgen wieder ein und vor allem auch im neuen Jahr. Wir freuen uns auf viele neue Taz-Talks und auch insbesondere zusammen mit der Initiative Queer Nations euch dort zu sehen. Vielen Dank an euch und vielen Dank, Deirdre.
Auf Wiedersehen.